the top 10 workflow mistakes. These are mistakes that we commonly see here in the office. So with our chat support team, with our team, when we are on calls with people. So these are the most common mistakes that we see. There are obviously other things that you can do in the workflow that might cause an error, or other smaller mistakes that you can make. But what we did was we compiled a list of the top 10 that we most commonly see. So this should help, especially if a lot of different people are making some of these different mistakes. It will definitely help with just seeing how to rectify those so that you're not making those mistakes anymore. And it will also help with just learning how the system works from a foundational standpoint. So let's get started with number 10. And number 10 on the list is the triple action bundle blunder. And that's a mouthful to say, but let's talk about this here. So in Dubsado, if you are newer to the system and maybe you are have been in the system for a while, you should know that you can combine a proposal, contract, and invoice together and send that out all as one bundle. And you can do so in the proposal settings. And so I have a picture here, and I'll just enhance this here. So you can see that once you are in the proposal settings, you're able to connect a contract and an invoice with the proposal and send that out all together. However, what happens normally with the workflow is, and let me actually bring this up here. There we go. So what normally happens with a workflow is that someone will combine the contract and invoice in the settings so that they have that bundle feature. But then in the workflow side of things, they'll do 3 actions all separate. They'll send out the proposal as the first action. Then they'll send out the contract after the proposal gets completed. And then they might do create invoice or send invoice after the contract is signed. By doing this, what you're actually doing is you're sending out the proposal, contract, and invoice all in the same action in the top there. Then once they finish the proposal, they'll get another email with the same contract, and then create invoice is actually going to make a brand new invoice, not the one that gets created from the proposal. So what you should do in this scenario is you can actually remove the second and third action in this workflow, because you combined everything in the proposal settings with the contract and the invoice. All you need to do is just send out the proposal, this first action, and the workflow will do all the heavy lifting for you. It's going to add the contract and the invoice that gets created all in the same action. So if you do have something set up where it's kind of a 3 action step, but you're wanting to combine them in a bundle, you can remove those second and third actions, just send out the proposal, and it will send everything together. So that's a great one, especially if you're wanting to do that combination bundle there. So that's number 10. And with each one of these, I have a little key at the bottom. So this is going to help you after this webinar is over. If you want to review this, you can see in there how to rectify this or what's going on in this workflow, why it might be wrong, why you might be experiencing some errors that when you're testing things. And this will help you as far as rectifying it and giving you a little bit of a key as to what's happening or how you can fix it. So that's number 10. Number 9 is the after all previous actions complete anarchy. And what this one is, and we do see this quite a bit, and I'll open this up here, is where you have these different actions in your workflow. And I just have 3 here, but you could have 3, 4, 5, 6 different actions. But what people are doing is they're actually putting immediately after all previous actions are complete on every single action. Because in their mind, if I send out the proposal immediately after it's been completed, that's what they think, it's going to send out the contract. And once the contract has been completed, then it's going to send out the primary invoice. However, in Dubsado, immediately after all previous actions are complete means that that action has happened. So what this is actually going to do, if we were looking at this workflow and it was applied to an actual client, what's happening here is the proposal is going out to the client. Right after they get that email with the proposal in there, it's going to send them the contract in another email. And then right after they get that contract, it's going to send the primary invoice out to the client right after that. So in Dubsado, it's very important to know that what makes the workflow, and where you get your automation and how everything will function at the right time and it's efficient and everything's firing when it's supposed to, is that you have the right triggers attached to the right actions. In Dubsado, the best advice I can give is that you should look through the actions and try to find the trigger, look through the triggers list and try to find the trigger that best fits what exactly you're trying to do. So for example, with the proposal, if you were wanting to do this where you're sending out each one separately, maybe that is what you want to do, is send them out one after another. What you would want to do in this workflow is, instead of sending out the contract immediately after, you would want to send out the contract after the proposal's been completed or after the form has been completed. And then you would only want the invoice to go out once they've signed their contract. So you would do after contract is signed. So when you're building a workflow, simply just kind of pasting after all previous actions complete on every single action that you have, that's going to cause a domino effect, where it's going to go through each action, just sending them out rapid fire. And you don't want your client to be receiving emails just back to back to back. So what I can give with advice with this here is, you should always look at the trigger, try to see if there's something that better fits what you're trying to do. If you can't find anything that's a better fit, then you can use after all previous actions are complete. Maybe put a approve button on there just in case, but always try to find the most specific trigger that will match with what you're trying to do. So that is number 9, the after all previous actions complete anarchy. All right. Number 8 is the missing form link mystery. And this one here, I'm just going to pop open this picture here. Everything I have today, we aren't really going into Dubsado. I just have pictures of what I'm explaining so we can kind of just talk through them here. So in this workflow action, when I'm building this, what is happening is I'm choosing send form. So I'm wanting to send a form to somebody. Then I've picked the form that I want to send. So I've picked that I want to send out a wedding timeline to a client. Now in the body of the email, you'll see where it says, hey, client first name. So it'll plug in their name there. I hope you are doing well. Please fill out the wedding timeline I've attached below. If you have any questions, please let me know. So that actually rhymed. I didn't realize that that rhymed, but it did. Anyways, in the body of this email, what's missing here is the form link. And so in the system, what you will need to have, and you can actually see there's instructions right here above the email that says, make sure this template includes the form link variable. You need to have that form link bracket or that smart field link in the body of this email. By doing that, it's going to create the button that attaches or links to the wedding timeline. So you can have this email there, you have the right action, you've picked your content, but in the body of the email, you're just missing that form link. And that works with maybe a contract where you're sending out a contract and there's no contract link, or maybe you're trying to send out a scheduler, but there's no scheduler link. So always make sure that you have your link inside the body of the email. That way it can create that button so that it attaches to whatever form you've selected here in the dropdown. So that's number 8, the missing form link mystery. Number 7 on the list here is the Diabolical double payment schedule. I love the names for these. It was kind of later in the day yesterday when I made these, so if they're kind of crazy names, that's why. But number 7, the Diabolical double payment schedule. So this one's a little bit tricky because it actually is not something that's necessarily just attached to the workflow where you might be experiencing an error or anything like that. It's actually tied to 2 different things. So in this workflow, you'll see 2 things. Number one, you'll see that there's a payment schedule in this workflow. So when I add this workflow to a project, it's going to put a 50-50 payment schedule on the invoice that they're going to be filling out or paying on. In the workflow, you'll see here where at this step in the process, I'm sending out my proposal. So in just looking at this workflow, you would think it would be just fine because my proposal's here. Once they fill that out, maybe they go to contract and then invoice. And then once they get to the invoice, there's the 50-50 payment schedule on there. So good to go. However, inside the proposal settings, if we click on the proposal settings for this proposal, you'll notice that there's also a payment schedule in the proposal settings as well. What this does is it creates kind of a canceling feature where the workflow will see that there is a payment schedule on the proposal and also on the workflow itself. So it's seeing double payment schedules and they cancel each other out. And if you have experienced this before, you'll probably notice in your workflow where you'll see that it can't find the right scheduled payment. You might get that error. That's because both of these payment schedules are canceling each other out. So the question here now is, where do I put the payment schedule then? What I recommend doing for putting the payment schedule or where to put it is to put it in the workflow itself. The reason why, and you would actually remove it from the proposal settings. So scratch it out of the settings there and only have it in the workflow itself. The reason why is because if you have a payment schedule in this slot, in this drop down in the workflow, it gives you the ability to use the trigger after scheduled payment is completed. So in this workflow, if I'm sending out, let's say, the proposal, contract, and invoice, and I want something to happen once they make a deposit, as long as I have that 50-50 as a part of the workflow itself, then I will be able to use the trigger after the deposit has been paid. So, or after scheduled payment is completed, and then choose the deposit. If you only have it in the proposal and you remove it off of the workflow, you'll still get that payment schedule on the invoice, but you don't get to use the trigger after scheduled payment is completed. So you would only be able to do something after they've paid their invoice in full. So my best advice, if you have them in both places, get rid of it off the proposal settings, just put it on the workflow itself, and then you'll get the benefits of both things. It'll be on the invoice and you can use that trigger. So that is number 7, the Diabolical double payment schedule. Now for number 6, the send email spell. With number 6, let me open this image up here. What typically happens with number 6 and what we found is that in the actions list, when a user sees send email, in their mind, what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to send an email, and then they're wanting to attach any type of attachment or form to go with it, because typically with things like Gmail, Yahoo, that's normally how the standard practices go, where you will write the email and then attach the form or attach whatever is supposed to go with that email. In Dubsado, it's actually the exact opposite, where you're going to pick the content first that you want to send and then attach an email to it. So what's happening in this sequence here is the user has picked send email because they're wanting to send an email and then hopefully attach a form. But in the body of this email here, you'll see where it says, "Thank you so much for your interest in working together. I'm excited to learn more about your project and get to know each other. To get started, please fill out the questionnaire below." They have their form link in there. However, in this scenario, the action is what's wrong. So in this action, you should actually choose send form. The reason why is because this form link here, and you can kind of think about the missing form link mystery that we talked about just a little bit earlier, where you have the form link, but if you'll notice here in this section, there's nowhere for you to decide what form is going to go with this form link. That's why the action has to be send form, because once you choose send form, it's going to give you the drop down to say, okay, which form are we sending? In this case, I would be able to choose my questionnaire, and then that would be the placeholder for where the questionnaire button is going to go. So the only thing that's wrong with this particular sequence here is the action just needs to be changed to send form. So that way you get the drop down that allows you to choose which form is going to go with this bracket here. So that's what's happening in here. This also happens a lot with schedulers, where someone might have send email and they have a scheduler link in there. The problem with this is that if you do have a scheduler link, there's nowhere for you to choose which scheduler is going to go with that bracket. So same scenario, what you would want to do there is send appointment scheduler as your action. That will give you a list of all of your appointment schedulers that you can choose from, and then that will go with the scheduler link that you have in there. So in this particular sequence, you just want to make sure not to use send email for everything. Send email should only be used if you're sending more of a text only type email, something that doesn't have a Dubsado attachment. It doesn't have anything that's going with it. It's just a plain text email or an attachment free email. That's really the only use for send email action. So that is the send email spell. Moving right along here, we're halfway done through these top 10. Now we'll move on to number 5, the Ruthless Reminders. And as we go through 10 all the way to 1, I tried to list these out with how often we see these. So the more that I go through these are the more common ones that we see a lot. So you might not have committed any of 10 through 6. That's totally fine. Maybe 5 through 1, you might see something because these ones are going to be a lot of the popular ones. So number 5, the Ruthless Reminders. What is happening in this sequence here is the user is trying to send an email a day before an appointment start time. And as you can see here, they're trying to do send email 1 day before the consultation starts. So in the user's mind here, they're wanting to send a appointment reminder to say, hey, your appointment is coming up. Please be ready for it. Or if there's information they need before the appointment, they're putting it in this email. However, although this technically will work correctly, everything up to this point works fine, and it actually will send appropriately. However, what's happening down here in the body of the email where you're putting in the appointment smart fields, this is where you're going to get into trouble. These smart fields can only be used inside the scheduler template itself. These will not work in a workflow. The reason why is because these can only see the appointment that it's actually attached to. So I have a key here down at the bottom to explain it a little bit further. But in the system, in a scheduler template, in the advanced tab, there's a section called the notification section. And that's where you can put all of your appointment reminders, as well as there's a section in the advanced tab where you can put confirmation emails. So all of the reminders, confirmation emails for appointments, those should go with the scheduler template itself, not as its own workflow action, because these smart fields will not work when it goes out. The only way these can work is if they're part of the scheduler template in the advanced tab. So add all of your reminders, upcoming appointment reminders, confirmation emails. Those should all go on the scheduler template itself. In your workflow, if you send out your consultation as an action, all of the reminders that are attached in the settings, those will all go along with it. They're nested inside of that scheduler template, so you don't have to make them their own actions. The same rules apply for payment reminders. Inside of a payment schedule, when you're building your due dates, there's a section in the modal where you can add in your reminders. So in the workflow, as long as you have the payment schedule as a part of your workflow, all of the automatic reminders will go out as well because it's nested inside of the payment schedule. So with schedulers and payment schedules, as long as you have them on the workflow, all the reminders, confirmation emails, payment reminders, all those things are going to go out on their own. They don't need to be their own actions. So look through your workflow, see if you have any appointment reminders or any payment reminders. Those should all be a part of the payment schedule or a part of the scheduler template itself. So those are the Ruthless Reminders. Number 4, the form and scheduler evil twins. So this one here, let me open this up. Actually, I think you can see it a little bit better. Well, we'll just open it up here so we can see it all in one. So in this particular sequence, what the user is trying to do here is they are wanting to send out a form and also send out a scheduler in the same email. In Dubsado, you are not able to send out a form and a scheduler, 2 different buttons in the same email in a workflow. And I will explain why in this sequence here. So let's say I choose send form, because remember, the only way that we can choose which form is going to go with this bracket is by choosing send form. So that way we get this drop down to say, okay, this is the form that I'm wanting to go with this form link, okay? So that will technically work. I have it here written here, please fill out my intake form attached below, as well as book your consultation with me. So when I send this email out to a client, that form is going to go right here. So we have that matched up. But what you'll notice is that with this scheduler link, there's nowhere here to decide what scheduler template is going to go with this scheduler link bracket. So in our system, it's not possible at the moment to send out both. There's not a way to choose which form goes with the form link and which scheduler goes with the scheduler link. It's not possible at the moment. And the same goes in reverse. So let's say that this action was send appointment scheduler, and we choose our scheduler template here, and that will go with the scheduler link. However, now we don't have a space to put in what form is going to go with that form link. So the scheduler and forms, they don't really play nicely together. That's why I call them evil twins. They're both very powerful. They can do a lot, but they don't really combine in an automated email. You can't put both of them together because you can only choose one template at a time here. So I did list out in the outline here some options for you, and I'm going to go through those here really quickly. Number 1, you can attach the form to the scheduler and send the scheduler to the client. If it's something that they need to fill out with the scheduler, in the scheduler settings, you can attach the questionnaire in the additional form section in the advanced tab and add it to the scheduler template. Now, when you send out the scheduler, it will send out the scheduler and the form together as one. So that's an option that you can do. Number 2 is you can upload both items to the client portal and then send them portal login information. So when you are, and I'll open this back up here again, when you're sending a form, when you're sending an appointment scheduler, you'll see that there's an apply to portal option. This will send it directly to the portal. You'll basically bypass the whole emailing portion of things and just send it directly to the portal. So what you could do is send the form to the portal, send the scheduler to the portal, and then send one email with their portal login information, giving them instructions saying, hey, once you log in, go ahead and book your appointment. You'll see the scheduler link in there. You can book it through your portal, and you'll also see the intake form. Please fill that out. So you could use the client portal to kind of front load all of those different forms and then send them their information. And then number 3, you could send them both out separately. So if you want to, you could have one action that is send form and they fill out the form first. Then once they complete that intake form, then send out the scheduler, or reverse. Send them the consultation and then maybe right after you send them the consultation, send them the intake form, or after they book an appointment, you can kind of play around with those two actions. Workflow wise, those are really the only options that you have. There is a fourth option, but it's not workflow related. You could just send a manual email. In our system, there's a way where you can send out a scheduler and a form, or multiple forms, or multiple scheduler templates if you wanted to, in the same email, but you have to do it manually, not in a workflow. And because this is more of a workflow centered webinar, I didn't really add that as an option because it's not workflow related. But if you want to send out a manual email, you can definitely do that. And then I did write it here. The same principle also works in reverse for send appointment scheduler with a form link. You can't have that in there. So that's number 4, which was the form and scheduler evil twins. All right, now we're down to the top 3 workflow mistakes. I wonder if anyone who's watching, if you're already thinking about what it could possibly be, we're going to jump into it right here. So number 3, the elusive embedded scheduler ghost. And what is happening in this particular sequence is what the user is trying to do is they are having their scheduler and a lead capture form embedded on their website. So this is very typical with coaches, maybe virtual assistants, anybody who is wanting to get someone to book with them directly on their website and get on their calendar. So you have a scheduler and a lead capture on your website, and you have a workflow that's attached to your lead capture. The first action in the workflow that you have is send let's say a meeting follow-up immediately after the appointment has ended. Now, what's happening is this trigger, you're wanting it to watch for the scheduler that's embedded on your website. However, the workflow can only watch scheduler templates that are being sent through the workflow. So this right here, where you see after appointment has ended, you'll notice when you're trying to build that action that you can't add a scheduler into that spot because there's not a scheduler template that's being sent through your workflow. Appointment triggers can only watch something that's inside the workflow, not something that's outside of that workflow. So to give you an example of what that means from a practical standpoint, I do have a slide here so you can see what I'm referring to. This is probably what you're seeing, where you have it set up where immediately after the appointment is ended, you want it to send an email, but it says you have not added an appointment scheduler to this workflow. Embedded schedulers cannot be watched from a workflow. So that's why I called it the elusive embedded scheduler ghost, because it just does not exist in this workflow. It can't find it. The reason for that is because of this here. When you have a scheduler and a lead capture embedded on your website, or you're sending the direct link, either one, whether it's the embed code or that direct link URL, when you're sending that, you're sending it publicly. It's a public scheduler that you're sending out to somebody or having someone fill out who's not in the system yet. So it's all being done outside of Dubsado. If you're familiar with the lead capture, a lead capture form is going to create a new project, and then it's going to start a workflow if you have the workflow attached to your lead capture. So what's happening here is that inside this workflow, just like what we were referring to, is that the workflow can only watch schedulers that are being sent inside of Dubsado, inside a project. So this scheduler that's technically outside of Dubsado, it cannot watch this embedded scheduler. That's why it's the elusive embedded scheduler ghost, is because it's outside of Dubsado. So what you would need to do to switch this up a little bit, if you're needing to use those triggers, is you would only have your lead capture form on your website. Somebody fills that out, the project gets created, the workflow kicks in, then the very first action would be send your appointment scheduler. Once that's in your workflow, now you can have things go out before an appointment starts, when something gets scheduled, after an appointment has ended. So the scheduler just needs to be in the workflow itself. And that's a slight process change. For some people, you can make that process change so it'll work for you. For those of you who cannot make that process change, where you need them to be able to book directly on your website, what you'll do is you'll actually apply the workflow manually once that appointment gets over. So if you have a scheduler and a lead capture on your website, they get on your availability. You don't know how that consultation is going to go. You don't know if it's going to go well. You don't know if they're not going to want to move forward. So when you do things like this, where you're wanting to send an email out after the appointment is ended, you don't really know how that's going to go. So what we recommend doing is do the scheduler and lead capture on your website, have the meeting with them. Once that meeting is over, then go into their work or into their project and just manually add in the workflow, start it, and then it'll start running for you. It's the most efficient way to do it based off of how our schedulers work when it comes to the workflow. So that's number 3, the Elusive Embedded Scheduler Ghost. Number 2, the After Form Completed First Trigger Fiasco. This is my favorite title. Out of all the ones that we have, this is my favorite title, the After Form Completed First Trigger Fiasco. This one happens quite often. And what's happening in this particular sequence is something like this, where the first action in the workflow is send appointment scheduler the 15-minute consultation immediately after form is completed. This, in what the user is trying to do in this scenario here, is they're wanting to watch the lead capture form. So they have a lead capture form on their website. Once that lead capture form gets filled out, they're wanting the workflow to kick in. And then this trigger, they're wanting to watch for that lead capture form to be completed. However, similar to the scheduler, remember, scheduler and form, they're kind of like evil twins. If you're using a form completion trigger, so that means after form is completed, after form is not completed, that's referring to any forms that are being sent through the workflow. So it works the exact same as the scheduler. It can only watch forms that are being sent through this workflow. So this would be a great use if you have a proposal that's gone out in your workflow. And once they, fill out the proposal, you want something to happen, or a questionnaire or a sub-agreement. That's going to be the reason that you would use the form completed or form not completed. What you'll want to do as far as this trigger is concerned, and I have it written here in this little, or actually it's down here in this little key, is the lead capture form technically starts the workflow. So when someone submits a lead capture, that starts your workflow for you. So the best trigger is going to be after workflow started, because the lead capture, once it's completed, starts the workflow. And then whatever action you have that says immediately after workflow started, then that will kick in and start running. So just make that little quick shift, and then that will help you so you're not getting that error message in number 2. All right. And number 1, and I personally believe that number 1 and number 2 can almost be interchanged here. But number 1 is the public scheduler hyperlink hypothesis. And I have a couple examples here to kind of explain what's going on. So what people I see happen a lot with a lot of users is they'll have an email that looks something like this. Hello, client first name. Step 1, please fill out the intake form. I've connected below. So they have that form link in there. That will work. Then what they'll do, because maybe they found out that if you put a scheduler link in there, remember number 4, you can't do that form and scheduler link together. So what they'll do is, since they can't have that scheduler link, they'll take the direct URL link from the scheduler. So you have your embed code and you have your direct link, and they'll just paste that hyperlink in the body of the email and then send this out in a workflow. Now, here's what's happening. You have, let's say they filled out a lead capture form and now they're in this system, they're set up with a project. If this is the first email that goes out to them inside of their project in a workflow, once they get here and they click on this link, it's going to open it up where they're filling out a scheduler and another lead capture form. So it would create another project, which you don't want to have happen. That's kind of like project inception, where inside of a project, they're filling out another scheduler that has another form attached to it that will create another project. This hyperlink here can only be used for anyone who does not have a project set up yet, or they're not in Dubsado. This email is meant to be sent through a workflow. If you are ever sending an appointment scheduler inside of a workflow, you have to use send appointment scheduler. You cannot use any other method for sending your appointment scheduler. No other action will work. And you cannot do this here with the hyperlink. So you'll see something like this. If someone were to fill this out, so let's switch this up a little bit. Let's say you don't have a lead capture form attached to this scheduler. Then what happens? Great question. I'm glad that you asked. So if someone were to fill this out, and let's say this is just a scheduler by itself, you don't have that additional form in there. Once someone books an appointment, they're going to pick their time, and then it will take them to kind of a fake lead capture form where they're putting in their information, which you don't want, but they're going to put in that information. You'll notice that that appointment goes on your calendar, but it's not attached to a project at all. That's because this is a public scheduler link. So this is only meant to be sent for someone who's not in the system yet. So you do not want to hyperlink your scheduler into any emails that are being sent through a workflow. This is only meant for outside of Dubsado. So if you wanted to put this, let's say, on an Instagram bio or on LinkedIn, maybe you have this on Facebook, or maybe in your email signature, if you're sending this through like a MailChimp link where you're just sending that link out, that's going to be the reason you would use this public scheduler link. Another kind of example that follows the exact same lines is this here, where you'll see someone say, please fill out the intake form I've connected below. So again, that form link is in there. Book your consultation with me here. And they'll bold that, and they'll actually use the hyperlink scenario. Again, you'll see that that URL is hidden in the background behind this here word. So book your consultation with me here. And then this is a public, and you can even see that it has the word public in there, a public scheduler. This cannot go into a email that's being sent through the workflow. We consider that a private scheduler where it's being sent through the workflow. There's public and then private scheduling. So you have to know when you're using which scenario. And then the last example here, and this one can be really tricky. So you have to watch out for this last one because it's not as glaring, and it might look correct, but you have to kind of look underneath the surface. And that's something like this. Same scenario, please fill out the intake form here. Book your consultation with me by clicking on this button. What they've done in this scenario here is, instead of using the hyperlink that you can have, there's also an option for a button where you can actually create a button and put a hyperlink attached to this button here. So again, they're just creating a button and putting that hyperlink as the link to this button, which again, no matter how you mask it, it's just the public scheduler link that should not be sent through a workflow. So all of these different examples, long story short, never put the direct link URL in a workflow email, because that's taking a public scheduler and trying to send it privately. So with all these different scenarios, what you would need to do is actually use a scheduler link. Now, you couldn't have the form link in there. We already talked about that with number 4. But if you are using a workflow, you have to use a scheduler link and use the action send appointment scheduler. There's no way around it in our system. And I do see this one quite frequently. Same with number 2. They're kind of 1A and 1B almost. But those are the top 10 common workflow mistakes, most common workflow mistakes. Like I said earlier at the beginning of the webinar, there's probably more, but between the chat support team, our phone team, the education team, these are the top 10 that we see quite often. So what I encourage you to do is to go through these top 10 again and cross-reference your workflows that you have. See if you're making any of these mistakes in there. If you are, I've put little keys at the bottom of every single action here, every single mistake, to help you rectify that so you can work through your workflows and kind of get rid of some of these mistakes. If you haven't built your workflows yet, then you're in a better position because now you can use this as a cheat sheet when you're building your workflows to say, oh, I know that this was number 7 and I need to avoid this. So when I'm building my workflow, do it differently. So take this outline, use it. Especially if you're watching this on YouTube later, you'll have the outline in the description. You can download it from there, and this will help you in your workflow building or your workflow auditing if you already have one set up.